as we palpate the extensors of the wrist and the flexors of the wrist, one thing we want to keep in mind, all of the flexors are found on the anterior forearm when we're in correct anatomical position. We say that this is the non-hairy side of the forearm. The extensors are going to be found on the posterior forearm or the hairy side of the forearm. Another important tool that you can use to find extensors versus flexors is to have your client contract a muscle called brachioradialis. We sometimes call this the divider muscle. So we support our client's elbow, have them make a fist, and push up into our hand, and you'll see this muscle here pop up. It runs all the way down to the styloid process of the radius. That's called brachioradialis. If we're palpating lateral to brachioradialis, we are now on the extensor muscle group. If we're palpating medial to brachioradialis, we're then on the flexor muscle group. So let's begin by palpating the extensors first. So the first extensor muscle we're going to palpate, it's really two muscles. We're going to palpate it as one. It's Extensor Carpi Radialis Longus and Extensor Carpi Radialis Brevis. Longus is going to originate from the supracondylar ridge on the lateral side of the humerus. Extensor Carpi Radialis Brevis is going to originate from the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. These two muscles are going to run down the forearm. They're going to cross the wrist. Longus is going to insert into the base of the second metacarpal. Brevis inserts into the base of the third. So to palpate these two muscles, you can take your client's hand. We're going to start around the lateral humerus, and we're going to have our client AB and AD duct. When they do this, it causes the extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis to pop up, and you can feel the muscle contracting. So we're going to find it, and then we're going to follow it down the forearm. If you feel like you're losing the muscle, you're not sure you're on it, again, have your client go into AB and AD duction. As they AB duct, we're going to feel the muscle contract. And we're going to follow that muscle down. And you can differentiate between longus going to the base of the second, and then brevis is going to the base of the third metacarpal. The next muscle we're going to look at and we're going to find is extensor digitorum. Extensor digitorum, it's an extensor muscle, therefore it's going to originate from the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. The muscle then comes down the forearm, crossing the wrist, and it's going to insert into the middle and distal phalanges of digits 2, 3, 4, and 5. One thing you can have your client do to contract the muscle is to wiggle their fingers as if they're playing the piano. And you actually see this muscle contract, which makes it very easy to palpate. Also, if they extend their wrist and extend their digits, the tendons are going to pop up on the dorsum of the hand. All right? So I'm going to start at the lateral epicondyle. I'm going to have my client wiggle their fingers. You can feel the muscle contracting, and I'm going to follow it all the way down the forearm. Again, if you feel like you lose it, have them do the action of the muscle. And wiggle your fingers. Great. I know that I'm on the muscle, and then I'm going to follow it. And again, the tendons branch here. You'll get a branch of each tendon going into digits 2, 3, 4, and 5. Last extensor is going to be extensor carpi ulnaris. It originates from the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. It then will go down the forearm, crossing the wrist, and it's going to insert on the base of the fifth metacarpal. This muscle is one that will adduct the wrist. So again, if we have our client go into adduction and abduction, alternating between the two, we will actually see the muscle pop up. So I'm going to start at the lateral epicondyle, go ahead and adduct. And go again. Okay, I feel the muscle as it's contracting, and I'm going to follow it. Down the forearm. And I should be able to follow it right to the base of the fifth metacarpal. All right, so again, those are your extensors. We have extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis, going down the forearm, longus inserting to the base of the second, brevis inserting to the base of the third. Extensor digitorum, originating at the lateral epicondyle of the humerus, goes down the forearm, crossing the wrist, and goes to digits 2, 3, 4, and 5. Lastly, we have extensor carpi ulnaris, originating at the lateral epicondyle of the humerus, heads down the forearm, past the wrist to insert at the base of the fifth metacarpal. So that's your extensor group. Now we're going to be palpating the flexors. So you want to make sure that you're palpating on the anterior side of the forearm. All of your flexors are going to originate around this medial epicondyle of the humerus. The first one we're going to palpate is going to be flexor carpi radialis. It's going to originate at the medial epicondyle. We'll go down the forearm, crossing the wrist to insert at the base of the second and the base of the third metacarpal. The one thing about the flexors, I usually like to start palpating at the wrist because the tendons pop up. So if you have your client go into flexion of the wrist, you can actually see the tendon of flexor carpi radialis. It's going to be the one closest to the thumb. The one you see in the middle is Palmaris longus. The one you see closer to the little finger, the fifth digit, or closer to the ulna is going to be flexor carpi ulnaris. So again, I'm going to have my client flex the wrist. And I'm going to find the tendon of flexor carpi radialis, and I'm going to follow it. To get this muscle to contract, we can have our client AB and adduct the wrist. As they abduct, I will feel a contraction. And I'm going to follow the muscle up to where it's originating at the medial epicondyle of the humerus. The next muscle is going to be Palmaris longus. So again, if we have our client flex the wrist, the tendon that pops up that's more in the center is going to be Palmaris longus. We can also have our client bring the thumb to the fifth digit, and that pops up the Palmaris longus tendon. Pops up even more with wrist flexion. All right. Palmaris longus originates at the medial epicondyle of the humerus, runs down the forearm, crossing the wrist, and it's going to insert on the palmar fascia, or the palmar aponeurosis. So I'm going to start here, finding the tendon, and then I'm going to follow it. If I'm not sure I'm on the muscle, again, I can have my client bring the thumb to the fifth digit, contracts, I can follow it up to the medial epicondyle. The last flexor is going to be flexor carpi ulnaris. Flexor carpi ulnaris, again, is going to originate from the medial epicondyle of the humerus. It's going to head down the forearm, crossing the wrist to insert on the pisiform, the hook of the hamate, and the base of the fifth metacarpal. When I have my client flex the wrist, I'm going to feel a tendon. If I can find pisiform, if I fall right off pisiform, proximally, I feel that tendon pop up of flexor carpi ulnaris, and then I'm going to follow it. If I'm not sure I'm on the muscle, again, I'm going to have my client move into AD and abduction, alternating between the two. Flexor carpi ulnaris, its action is adduction of the wrist. So when my client adducts, I should feel the muscle pop up, and then I'm going to follow it to the medial epicondyle of the humerus. And that's your flexor group. Again, we have flexor carpi radialis, origin, medial epicondyle, down the forearm past the wrist to insert at the base of the second and third metacarpal. We have Palmaris longus. It's going to originate at the medial epicondyle. It's going to head down the wrist. It's going to be inserting on the palmar fascia. And then we have flexor carpi ulnaris. Again, it's originating from the medial epicondyle of the humerus, comes down the forearm, crossing the wrist to insert at the pisiform, hook of the hamate, base of the fifth metacarpal.